The $4,000 wedding veil wasn't made of silk and lace. It was a meticulously stitched courier service, hiding the evidence that would expose my fiancé's multi-million-dollar conspiracy and his plan to stage my own tragic accident. The silk of my wedding veil felt heavier than lead, but I couldn't let anyone see it. It was custom-made, a masterpiece of ivory lace and shimmering thread, costing more than my fiancé David was willing to admit to his parents. We were 6 weeks from the wedding, and I was supposed to be floating on air, planning centerpieces and tasting cake flavors. Instead, I felt like I was walking through cement, one deliberate, terrifying step at a time. David was perfect on the surface. Successful architect, charming smile, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order from the first time you met. His family, old money, viewed me, a successful but middle-class graphic designer, with a sort of polite, cautious curiosity. I loved him, or at least, I loved the future he promised. Stability, comfort, a life far removed from my slightly chaotic upbringing. The problem started with the veil. My mother, bless her meticulous soul, insisted on inspecting every detail of the bridal attire herself. She'd driven 3 hours from her small town to supervise the final fitting at the high-end boutique downtown. While I was pinned into the dress, she took the veil into the light, holding it up to the large, ornate mirror. "It's exquisite, darling," she murmured, turning it slowly. Then she stopped. Her voice went thin. "Evelyn, come here. Look at this stitch near the scalloped edge, right where it meets the tulle." I wobbled over, my hoop skirt catching on the plush carpet. The veil was heavy, cascading down my back like a waterfall. "What is it, Mom? A loose thread?" "No, dear, it's deliberate. It's too tight, too dark for the rest of the embroidery. Almost like someone tried to hide something under the lace with it." In the bright, unforgiving light of the boutique, I saw it. It wasn't a loose thread. It was a single, almost invisible black thread woven deep into the ivory pattern, pulled impossibly taut. It didn't belong. It looked like a scar on the perfect canvas. I dismissed it as an apprentice's mistake, a tiny flaw in an otherwise flawless piece, and told my mother not to worry. But later that night, after David had kissed me goodnight, that familiar, slightly detached kiss, I couldn't shake the image of that black stitch. I went to the bathroom cabinet, pulled out the tiny travel sewing kit David had given me for Christmas, a sleek stainless steel case, and selected the sharpest, finest needle I could find. My hands were shaking so badly I had to steady my wrist against the porcelain sink. This was insane. I was about to destroy a $4,000 veil over a stray piece of thread. But the feeling, that cold knot in my stomach, was louder than reason. I found the veil folded neatly in its protective garment bag in the guest room closet. I laid it flat on the bed, plunging the needle exactly where my mother had pointed. I didn't pull. I carefully worked the point of the needle under the dense, hand-stitched applique, trying to hook the offending black thread. It snagged immediately. It wasn't a thread. It was a filament, thin as a hair, but surprisingly stiff. As I gently eased it out, I realized it was attached to something small and metallic. My heart slammed against my ribs. I worked for 10 agonizing minutes, my breath held tight in my chest, until I finally managed to tease the object free from the silk. It was a micro SD card, tiny, barely the size of my pinky nail, the edges coated in a thin layer of dried adhesive, clearly intended to be permanently glued beneath the lace backing and secured by that single, dark stitch. I sat back on my heels, staring at the insignificant piece of technology. Why? Why would someone hide a data chip inside the most sacred, visible part of my wedding attire? David had been strangely insistent that the veil be fitted and delivered directly to our shared apartment, refusing to let the boutique send it to my mother's house where she could inspect it more thoroughly. He'd said it was for logistical simplicity. I fumbled for the small card reader I used for my camera memory, plugging it into my laptop. My fingers felt clumsy and huge. I inserted the micro SD card, praying my laptop wouldn't explode from the sheer absurdity of the situation. The system recognized it immediately. It wasn't encrypted, it was just there. A folder named simply Project K. Inside the folder were dozens of files, mostly spreadsheets and schematics labeled with complex financial codes I didn't recognize. Then there were PDFs. These were different. They were heavily redacted legal documents, court filings related to civil suits and corporate restructuring. And then I saw a file name that made my blood run cold. Asset Transfer, Sterling and Hayes Acquisition Strategy. Sterling and Hayes was the small, highly respected property development firm David had just been promoted to lead partner at, the firm his family essentially controlled. I clicked on the final file, a video log. It opened instantly. The frame was dark, illuminated only by a harsh overhead light. I saw David, but not the charming fiancé I knew. His face was grim, his eyes hard and cold. He wasn't alone. Across the table sat Mr. Vance, David's senior partner, a man I'd only ever seen in tailored suits and polite smiles. Vance leaned forward, his voice low and menacing in the recording. "The timetable is aggressive, David. Your merger timeline is tight. We need those preliminary structural reports finalized by Tuesday, or the whole Sterling acquisition stalls. And if Sterling stalls, the entire network is exposed." David nodded, picking up a thick binder. "The structural integrity reports are fabricated, Vance. I told you. The real foundation assessment shows a catastrophic flaw in the foundation pillars on the West Tower. If we build on that, the whole thing comes down in 5 years. It's dangerous." Vance let out a short, harsh laugh. "Danger is manageable. Liability is not. You sign off on the fake report, David. You are the lead architect now. You take the fall if this catastrophic flaw ever surfaces. The payoff for your compliance is the controlling interest in the new holding company we are setting up, the one your family doesn't even know about yet." My vision tunneled. Fabrication? A collapse? And then David said the words that didn't just shatter my upcoming wedding. They shattered my entire reality. "I understand the risk, Vance, but what about Evelyn? She knows too much about the initial transfer documents. She's too smart for a trophy wife role. Are we sure she's manageable after the wedding?" Vance sighed, tapping a pen on the table. "Evelyn is a complication. But David, you assured us she was blinded by the ring. You're marrying her, remember? That makes her collateral. If she starts digging, you handle it. We can't afford any loose ends before the final paperwork is signed next month, especially with the service internal checking in on those offshore accounts." David leaned back, his face emotionless, as he looked directly into the camera, directly at me. "Evelyn won't dig. She loves me. And if she does, I have contingency plans for every piece of data she might uncover, including ways to make a sudden tragic accident look like something else entirely. She won't see it coming." The video cut out, leaving me staring at the dark screen, the silence in the room suddenly suffocating. He wasn't just cheating. He was orchestrating a massive corporate fraud, risking lives with shoddy construction, and he had planned, from the moment he proposed, to use me as either a silent partner in crime or a convenient casualty. The veil wasn't for my beauty. It was a courier service for evidence, a way to pass vital information to a co-conspirator before the wedding, hidden in plain sight. I looked down at the micro SD card in my trembling hand, then at the phone vibrating silently on the nightstand. It was David, calling me from a late-night meeting. I had the proof, the blueprints for a potential disaster, the recordings of conspiracy, and a direct threat to my life. I knew I couldn't go to the police. The scope of this organized scheme sounded too powerful, too deeply rooted in finance and real estate for the local precinct to handle, especially with the mention of some kind of internal oversight service already sniffing around. I had to disappear. But before I could even decide which country offered the best anonymity, my laptop chimed again. a notification from the cloud backup service I used for my professional portfolio. It was an automated sync notification. A new file had been added to my secure, password-protected folder just 5 minutes ago while I was watching David's confession. The file name? Evelyn, Contingency Protocol, Final Draft. It meant he hadn't just been talking about handling me later. He had already uploaded the final stages of his plan against me. And since I was sitting here, looking at the evidence of his betrayal, I realized something terrifying. He must have planted something on my computer before I even found the veil, something that had just finished syncing. I clicked the file, my finger hovering over the trackpad, bracing myself for the worst blueprint of all. The Evelyn Contingency Protocol opened with chilling efficiency. It wasn't a threat. It was a detailed, step-by-step operational guide, complete with timelines and location coordinates. It was chillingly impersonal, like a technical manual for decommissioning a piece of faulty equipment. The document outlined a 3-phase plan. Phase 1, isolation and sabotage. This detailed how David would systematically erase my digital footprint, my freelance accounts, my cloud storage, even our shared banking access over the next 48 hours, making it look like a complex, targeted digital hack initiated by a rival firm. Phase 2, the accident. It referenced a scheduled weekend getaway to a remote cabin his family owned upstate, ostensibly for a final romantic retreat before the nuptials. The protocol detailed how a specific, high-voltage electrical surge would be engineered near the private lake house's old wiring system during a predicted thunderstorm, causing an electrocution that would leave no ambiguity about the cause of death. Phase 3 was labeled Asset Liquidation and Alibi Confirmation. This detailed how, after my supposed demise, David would immediately secure my substantial but locked-away inheritance from my late aunt, funds I hadn't even realized he had access to, and how his lawyer had already drafted statements confirming his impeccable grief and absolute innocence. I looked at the date on the protocol. It was set to initiate the moment David returned from his meeting tonight. He was already on his way back to our apartment, where I was sitting, holding the physical evidence of his conspiracy and reading the digitized blueprint from my murder. My mind raced. The phone was still vibrating insistently. I silenced it, shoving it under a cushion. I couldn't call anyone. If he had this level of operational planning, he surely had eyes and ears everywhere, perhaps even an embedded monitoring system in the apartment itself, which would instantly alert him if I made an external call regarding these sensitive matters. The mention of the service internal checking in on those offshore accounts suggested he was already navigating scrutiny from some powerful regulatory body, and he wouldn't hesitate to use a local tragedy to cover his tracks. I had maybe an hour, tops, before he walked through that door expecting me to be asleep or, better yet, gone. I scrambled to pack. Not clothes. David controlled our shared credit cards and bank accounts. I needed cash, essentials, and the evidence. I grabbed my emergency passport, a small wad of emergency cash hidden in a hollowed-out book on my shelf, a habit from my more paranoid college days, and crucially, the micro SD card and the printouts of the contingency protocol. I couldn't leave the apartment looking like a panicked flight. I needed to buy time. I quickly arranged the room to look undisturbed, though the massive wedding dress bag lay open like a gaping wound on the bed. I carefully placed the veil back into its protective sleeve, making sure the tiny black stitch was perfectly hidden again. If he checked that first, I needed him to believe I hadn't found anything. The plan crystallized. I couldn't just run. Running meant letting him get away with the corporate fraud and the structural deception that could kill dozens of future tenants. I needed to present this evidence to someone uncompromised, someone capable of handling an investigation that seemed to touch on high finance and potentially dangerous organized figures. The mention of the service internal was my only lead. I booted up my burner laptop, an ancient machine I kept offline for sensitive design work, and began composing an encrypted email. I attached scans of the fabricated Sterling and Hayes reports and the video file, anonymizing the source as much as possible, but I needed an address. Who was powerful enough but insulated enough? Then I remembered my old mentor from university, Professor Alistair Finch. He had retired 2 years ago, but before that, he'd been a leading academic in forensic accounting before taking a sabbatical to consult for various international regulatory bodies. He was the only person whose integrity I trusted implicitly, and he had deep governmental connections without being part of the immediate corporate structure David operated in. I found Professor Finch's private encrypted contact email, which he used only for sensitive research papers. I composed a brief, almost cryptic message. Alistair, I have found a threat to structural safety and systemic fraud involving the Sterling/Hayes merger. The veil held the key. Full documentation attached. I need immediate, secure contact regarding the internal review service mentioned in the files. I attached the massive data packet, double-checking the encryption levels. The file transfer bar crawled across the screen, agonizingly slow on my weak Wi-Fi connection. 30%. 45%. I heard the heavy rumble of David's luxury sedan pulling into the garage below. He was early, far too early. My heart hammered so violently I thought the sound alone would betray me. I yanked the laptop power cord, severing the connection mid-transfer. The screen went black. The evidence was partially uploaded, but the full transfer had been interrupted. Professor Finch might have the first breadcrumbs, but not the whole cake. I threw the burner laptop into the bottom of my smallest, most battered carry-on bag, zipping it shut just as the key turned in the front door lock. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing my features into the mask of the slightly tired, slightly giddy fiancé who had just finished wedding prep. I slipped the carry-on bag into the laundry chute that led to the basement storage unit, a desperate hiding spot, but one I hoped David wouldn't check immediately. The door swung open. David stood there, tossing his keys onto the entry table with that practiced, casual confidence. His eyes scanned the room, lingering for a fraction too long on the guest room door, but then snapping back to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, you're still up, darling? I thought you'd be asleep after that marathon fitting." "Long day?" he asked, already loosening his tie. I managed a weak smile, walking towards him slowly, deliberately. "Just reviewing the final seating chart, sweetheart. Everything's perfect." He stepped forward, pulling me into a hug that felt less like affection and more like a subtle physical assessment, checking if I was flinching, checking if I was hiding anything. As he held me, his hand drifted casually to the back of my head, right where my hair met my neck. "Good," he murmured into my hair, his voice dangerously soft, "because I actually cut the meeting short. Vance had a breakthrough with the regulatory filing schedule. I came back quickly to tell you the amazing news. We're moving the date up. We're getting married next Friday." My entire body seized up. Moving the wedding up by 4 weeks meant his Phase 2 plan, the staged electrocution at the cabin during the predicted thunderstorm, was now impossible. He wasn't celebrating. He was rushing the cleanup. He needed the marriage finalized before the regulators dug too deep, and he needed me silenced before I had the chance to connect the dots between the Vail courier drop and his sudden corporate breakthrough. Before I could process the shift in timeline, David pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, and his hand squeezed my neck. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to send a jolt of pure, cold dread through me. "Don't look so shocked, Evelyn," he whispered, his smile widening into something predatory. "I just decided I can't wait another minute to make you officially mine, especially now that the paperwork is all finalized. I just need you to sign one last preliminary affidavit tonight, confirming your understanding of the joint asset agreement before the official transfer paperwork goes through at midnight. It's just a formality, darling. You trust me, don't you?" He stepped back toward his briefcase, pulling out a sleek, leather-bound folder that looked suspiciously like the one Vance was holding in the video. I knew what was in that folder. The real transfer documents, the forged signatures, and possibly a signed declaration naming me as complicit in the initial stages of the fraud. The document he wanted me to sign right now was the final nail. I looked from the folder to the darkened laundry chute, where my only means of escape and my proof of his conspiracy lay hidden. I had seconds to decide: sign and become his legally bound accomplice, or refuse and face the full, immediate wrath of a man who had already planned my funeral. The air in the apartment grew thick, pressing down on my lungs. David held the leather folder open, the paper inside crisp and stark white under the hallway light. His gaze was unwavering, challenging me to defy him. The rush to move the wedding wasn't about love. It was about preemptive damage control. He needed my signature to lock me into the financial conspiracy before I could fully expose the construction fraud. "Evelyn, it's just a formality," he repeated, the edge in his voice unmistakable now. It was the sound of a predator realizing its prey is cornered, but not yet dead. My mind raced, sorting through the fragmented evidence. The micro SD card in the chute, the partially uploaded email to Professor Finch, and the contingency plan that had just shifted from a distant threat to an immediate requirement. I had to buy time to recover the rest of the data and get the full report to Finch. Refusing outright would trigger an immediate, violent reaction. He wouldn't wait 4 days for the staged accident if he knew I was compromised. I forced my lips into a brittle semblance of a smile. "Of course, David. I trust you completely." I walked toward him, but instead of reaching for the document, I positioned myself slightly to his right, blocking his line of sight to the laundry chute. "It's just, I'm so nervous about this sudden date change. Can we have a glass of water first? My mouth is like sandpaper." He hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly, clearly irritated by the delay, but unwilling to push too hard before securing the signature. If I panicked now, he'd know I'd found something. "Fine, water, but be quick about it." He placed the folder on the hall console table, turning to walk into the kitchen, his back momentarily exposed. That was my chance. I didn't go toward the kitchen. I darted to the hall closet, flung the door open, and yanked the emergency duffel bag from the top shelf, the bag containing my passport, burner laptop, and the vital evidence. I knew where his spare keys were kept, in a small ceramic dish near the front door. I snatched the keyring, feeling the comforting weight of the emergency cash I'd grabbed earlier tucked into the lining of the bag. I was halfway to the front door when David shouted from the kitchen, "Evelyn, where are the glasses?" I didn't answer. I threw open the apartment door and bolted. The corridor of our luxury high-rise building was unnervingly silent. I sprinted toward the elevator, jamming the down button repeatedly. The building was state-of-the-art. Surveillance was everywhere. I had to get out of the visual field immediately. As the elevator doors hissed open, I jumped in, slamming the lobby button. Just as the doors began to close, a voice boomed from the stairwell access door down the hall. "Evelyn, stop right there!" It was David. He had spotted the open closet door or realized my sudden vanishing act, and he was moving with the speed of someone who had already planned the sequence of failure. The elevator started its descent, painfully slow. I leaned against the mirrored wall, clutching the duffel bag to my chest. I could hear the heavy, rapid thudding of his footsteps echoing on the marble floor as he reached the elevators just as the car passed the 20th floor. He would hit the override button. I looked frantically around the mirrored box. There was no time to try to hack the system. David had the advantage of knowing the building's security protocols intimately. He'd helped design the building layout, for God's sake. The elevator shuddered violently between the 15th and 14th floors, then ground to a halt. The lights flickered once, then died, plunging the car into absolute darkness, save for the faint green glow of the emergency panel. My breath hitched. He hadn't just hit the override. He had cut the power to the entire elevator bank. A moment later, a small, focused beam of light pierced the darkness from above. David was clearly using the maintenance access hatch on the roof of the car. "I gave you a chance to be discreet, Evelyn," his voice echoed down, amplified by the metal shaft. "You leave me no choice. You're ruining my network, and you're going to pay for it." The metal hatch above me screeched as he began forcing it open. I knew I couldn't face him physically in that confined space. I needed a distraction, and I needed to get to that laundry chute evidence. Fumbling blindly in the dark, I found the handle of the duffel bag and frantically dug for the only non-digital weapon I had, a heavy antique silver letter opener that belonged to my aunt, the very same one whose inheritance he was trying to seize. As the hatch above me buckled inward and I saw the silhouette of David preparing to drop down, I pointed the letter opener upward, not aiming for a killing blow, but for the critical spot that might cause maximum disruption. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged upwards, plunging the sharp point not into David, but into the delicate wiring bundle visible just inside the access panel, the emergency communication line. Sparks erupted with a sharp crack, showering down into the elevator car. The emergency lights died completely. The only illumination was the flickering, angry orange glow from the short-circuited wires above me. I heard David curse, a sharp, genuine sound of surprise and pain, as the electrical discharge hit him. The hatch slammed shut again, this time not by him, but by the sudden system failure and his recoiling weight. The elevator remained suspended in darkness, dead. I was trapped between floors, but I had bought maybe 60 seconds of confusion. I had to get back up. Reaching the laundry chute required returning to the apartment, facing the very man who was now actively trying to capture me. I felt along the elevator wall until my fingers brushed against the maintenance panel release I vaguely remembered seeing near the floor. With a desperate yank, the small panel sprang open, revealing the narrow crawl space between the shaft wall and the elevator car frame. I squeezed into the tight, dusty space, ignoring the grit and the smell of ozone, hoping the power outage would render the cameras blind, at least momentarily. I had to ascend the shaft using the narrow gaps between the cables, praying the backup brakes wouldn't suddenly engage. Climbing the thick, greasy cables felt like scaling a mountain in the pitch black. I focused only on the small, dark rectangle of my apartment door 20 feet above me, knowing that if David regained control of the situation, or if the building management rebooted the power, I'd be caught, physically trapped in the elevator shaft, while he stood waiting in the hallway with that folder full of fabricated consent. I pulled myself up past the 17th floor, lungs burning, when a new sound pierced the silence of the dark shaft. Not David, but a heavy mechanical whirring from somewhere far below. The building was initiating its emergency protocol restart. The lights in the shaft would be coming back on any second now. Just as the first weak emergency floor lights flickered on near the 18th floor, I reached the top of the car, my fingers scrabbling for purchase on the rough edge of the outer shaft wall, desperately trying to hoist myself onto the landing platform before the power surge illuminated my escape route to the rest of the building. The emergency lights sputtered back to life, weak and amber, casting long, grotesque shadows up the elevator shaft. I was halfway out of the car, clinging precariously to the rough concrete lip of the landing platform, my muscles screaming in protest. The grinding whir from below intensified. The elevator was rebooting, and soon the doors would either slam shut or grind open, exposing me right there on the 18th floor landing, halfway into the service corridor. I gave one final desperate heave, scrambling onto the narrow maintenance ledge, my duffel bag, containing the laptop and the crucial initial evidence, swinging wildly. I flattened myself against the cold wall, pressing my body into the shadows just as the emergency brake mechanism released with a loud clunk. The elevator car beneath me began to jerk upward, smoothly overriding the halt. David must have found a manual override panel on another floor, or the building security system had simply taken over from the tripped short circuit. Either way, he was moving, and I had lost the element of surprise. I scurried along the cramped maintenance ledge, moving toward the fire escape access door, the only non-monitored exit point in the entire service area. My fingers scraped against the metal as I searched blindly for the emergency release bar. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of David's heavy footsteps was now audible from inside the elevator car, muffled but unmistakable. He hadn't been physically hurt by the electrical discharge. He'd just been delayed and momentarily blinded. He knew exactly where I was headed. I located the long horizontal release bar. I slammed my shoulder against it, adrenaline overriding the pain in my already bruised ribs. The heavy metal door swung outward with a loud, protesting groan that echoed through the silent service corridor. I spilled out onto the 18th floor landing, rolling immediately to my feet, scrambling for the fire exit door tucked discreetly behind a utility closet. I didn't look back. If he emerged from the elevator now, he'd see me fleeing down the corridor. I ripped the fire door open and plunged into the stairwell, taking the steps 3 at a time, descending rapidly. Every floor passed was a small victory, pulling me further from the confines of David's immediate control. I counted the floors. 17, 16, 15. I needed to get to the ground floor and disappear into the city traffic before David could mobilize any of his associates. And I knew men capable of corporate fraud on that scale always had contingency personnel ready. On the 14th floor, I risked a glance back up the stairwell. Nothing. But I didn't slow down. I reached the 10th floor when I heard the distinct sound of a heavy door slamming open somewhere above me, followed by the rhythmic pounding of someone running down the stairs with focused intent. David was fast, and he was gaining. I pushed harder, ignoring the lactic acid burning in my legs. I needed to reach the ground floor lobby, the most public, crowded space, and blend into the night. I burst through the final fire door onto the polished marble of the main entrance lobby. It was almost midnight. The security staff was minimal, but there were a few late-arriving executives and doormen. I kept my head down, pulling the hood of my sweatshirt, which I'd luckily grabbed along with the duffel bag, over my head. I made a beeline for the revolving glass doors, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the duffel bag containing the burner laptop. As I pushed through the glass panel, the cool night air hit my face, bringing momentary relief. I emerged onto the street, instantly enveloped by the noise and lights of the city. I merged into the sparse pedestrian traffic, trying to appear like any other late-night office worker desperate to get home. I didn't dare pull out my phone to call Professor Finch. The risk of David having located my primary device or having planted something on it was too high. I had to find a public terminal or a safe location to boot the burner laptop and resume the upload. I walked 3 blocks away from the monolithic tower, ducking into a poorly lit alleyway between 2 older buildings. A risky spot, but the brief cover was necessary. I pulled out the burner laptop, heart pounding, and connected the external drive that held the incomplete data transfer. I powered up the ancient machine. The screen glowed green, slow and unsteady. It recognized the drive. I navigated to the shared cloud service folder, found the half-sent email to Professor Finch, and hit resend. The transfer bar began its agonizing crawl again. 1%, 5%. I heard a car screech to a halt just outside the alley entrance. Not just stopping, but blocking the exit. The headlights flooded the narrow space, blinding me. A deep voice cut through the engine noise, loud and calm. "Evelyn, this ends now. You have 10 seconds to walk out here, unarmed, and hand over the hardware. Otherwise, I'm sending in backup, and they won't be as polite as I've been." I looked at the transfer bar. 18%, not nearly enough. I needed the complete file, especially the details about the structural flaws that could compromise entire buildings. I slammed the laptop shut again, securing the evidence. I had no weapon left, and the alley was a dead end. David had anticipated my flight path. Then I noticed something in the glare of the headlights. 2 figures, large and silent, were emerging from the passenger side of the blocked car. moving with the unnerving coordination of trained professionals. They weren't police. They moved too smoothly, too deliberately. The contingency personnel David mentioned. I looked wildly around the dead-end alley. There was a dumpster large enough to hide in, but it was too slow. Then I noticed it. A low, rusted metal grate set into the ground near the back wall, leading down into the city's subterranean network. Likely an old utility access point or storm drain. I ran toward the grate, dropping to my knees, grabbing the rusted edges. I could hear the mercenaries closing the distance, their heavy footsteps echoing on the concrete. "She's heading for the access point," one of them yelled. I yanked upward with all my strength. The grate was heavier than I anticipated, rusted in place. I pulled again, my fingers slipping on the damp metal. The first mercenary was 10 feet away, reaching into his jacket. With a final, desperate grunt, the grate tore free from the concrete seal with a terrifying screech of grinding metal, opening a black, cavernous hole beneath my feet. I didn't hesitate. I shoved the heavy laptop bag containing the evidence deep into the hole, then threw myself after it, falling hard onto wet, uneven ground in the darkness below, just as the first mercenary tackled the edge of the opening above me. I hit the bottom hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I landed not in water, but on a pile of discarded, surprisingly soft industrial insulation, a lucky break in the darkness of the utility tunnel. Above me, the massive metal grate hung precariously, held only by the friction of its rust-seized frame and the fact that the mercenary holding it had lost his footing on the slick alley floor. "She's down there! Secure the asset!" David's voice, sharp and furious, drifted down from above, laced with true panic now that the easy capture had turned into a subterranean chase. I scrambled blindly, clutching the duffel bag containing the burner laptop. The sound of the grate above me shuddered violently. They were trying to leverage it open or push it entirely off. I had seconds before they dropped in after me, or before the main security sweep caught my position. My only advantage was the darkness and the network of tunnels. I flipped the burner laptop open again, ignoring the dust and the dampness seeping into the casing. The screen flickered to life, showing the terrifyingly slow progress bar. 35%. "I can't let them get this data," I muttered, crawling backward, deeper into the echoing blackness of the tunnel. I needed to secure the evidence, not just for myself, but for the hundreds of people who would live and work in that faulty tower. Suddenly, a beam of light cut through the gloom from the opposite end of the tunnel. Not the harsh, focused beam of a tactical flashlight, but a broader, softer light source, accompanied by a familiar, cautious voice. "Evelyn? Is that you?" I received a fragmented upload notification. "Highly suspicious routing. Are you in danger?" It was Professor Finch. Relief washed over me so intensely I nearly cried. He hadn't just received the data. He'd anticipated the nature of the threat based on my cryptic message and had used his own secure channels to trace the last known location of the partial transfer. He must have had contacts in municipal services who knew about these old, rarely used maintenance tunnels. "Professor, yes, I'm here, behind me." "David hired people. They're coming from the grate above," I shouted, pointing my flashlight beam toward the disturbance above. The professor's light swung upward, illuminating the silhouette of the mercenary struggling to keep the grate from falling entirely. "Stay exactly where you are, Evelyn. Do not move from that spot." Professor Finch didn't panic. He spoke into a radio clipped to his jacket, his voice calm but commanding. "Control, I have eyes on the primary subject and 2 hostile individuals attempting forced entry via utility access point Delta 7, requesting immediate immobilization of the entry points and deployment of regulatory retrieval team to Sector 4 Bravo. Advise local authorities of a significant corporate fraud situation involving potential structural negligence at the Sterling Tower development. Execute hard lockdown on all associated financial transfers immediately." The moment he finished speaking, the sound from above changed. The struggling stopped, replaced by a sharp, authoritative command that was clearly not David's, a voice commanding compliance from a position of undeniable authority. Within seconds, the sound of heavy boots descending the ladder, not running, but methodical and armed, echoed down the shaft. The mercenary above must have realized he was suddenly facing professionals beyond local law enforcement, perhaps the very service internal David had feared. I crawled over to Professor Finch, shoving the burner laptop into his hands. The transfer was only at 35%. Finish it now. And look at the contingency file. He planned to frame my death as an accident next Friday. Finch didn't even glance at me. He plugged the laptop into a ruggedized tablet he carried. Don't worry, dear girl. When I get a ping like that, a direct threat of engineered collapse mixed with offshore maneuvering, I don't wait for the full packet. I initiate the halt based on the initial file headers. His tablet screen flashed green, confirming full data ingestion. It's secured, Evelyn. David's entire operation, the faulty blueprints, the shell companies, the coercion, it's all in our hands now. The regulatory services have already frozen every asset tied to the initial acquisition strategy. Sterling and Hayes is collapsing as we speak. As the retrieval team secured the men above, I heard the distinct sound of handcuffs clicking shut. I watched David's voice, tinny and desperate, echoing from the grate as the officers pulled him out, likely trying to claim innocence until the last second. Professor Finch guided me out of the tunnel and into the waiting, unmarked government vehicle. The terror began to recede, replaced by a staggering exhaustion. He called it a contingency plan, Professor, I whispered, leaning my head against the cool window glass. He planned to kill me. Finch patted my shoulder gently. I know, Evelyn. But David made one fatal error in his meticulous planning. He trusted in technology, and he underestimated the resilience of human connection. You found the stitch in the veil, Evelyn. You found the evidence he thought was perfectly hidden. David's contingency is now his reality. He faces dozens of charges, including conspiracy and attempted murder. Given the scale of the fraud and the potential for loss of life he was willing to risk, he won't see sunlight for decades. As we drove away from the towering, now dark structure of the Sterling Tower headquarters, I looked back one last time. The facade of perfection was shattered, revealing the rot beneath. My wedding was canceled. My fiancé was gone. But I was alive, and I had stopped a catastrophe. The heavy weight of the veil was finally lifted. I was free, and the terrifying, beautiful thread of truth had saved me.